Your license and registration, and you're gonna have to say sorry for the attitude back there. I don't take kindly to that.
Is that so? Maybe this will clear things up. District Attorney's Office, Marcus Hill.
Understood, sir.
Blue lights streaked across a courthouse parking lot. Officers formed a tight perimeter around a silver sedan. A deputy stood beside the driver's door with a hand on his weapon. His voice sounded sharp and angry. The driver stayed calm. He showed an identification card with a seal that matched the county office. The deputy ignored it. He leaned closer and threatened him. His exact words hit the bodycam microphone. "You'll be sorry." Another unit arrived. A supervisor asked the driver for his name. The answer changed the scene. The man in the driver's seat worked for the county. He held the highest legal authority in the region. The deputy threatened the district attorney on camera. That video moved through the department fast. Careers shifted. The courthouse closed at 6 p.m. Security lights switched on across the parking lot. Streetlights glowed against light rain. The offices inside turned dark one hallway at a time. Employees walked to their cars under the watch of 2 courthouse deputies. Their shift ended at 7 p.m. They logged names, locked doors, and kept the plaza clear. At 6:32 p.m., a silver sedan rolled into the lot. The driver kept headlights low and moved toward the employee spaces. Deputy Ross watched from the curb. He saw the car pull into a space marked for staff. Ross never saw the driver before. He stepped across the pavement and told the driver to move. The driver rolled down the window and said he worked in the building. Ross asked for proof. The driver held up a badge wallet and spoke with a steady tone. Ross looked at the seal on the card and shrugged. He told the driver that he lacked clearance after hours. The man responded with calm explanation. Ross interrupted and ordered him to leave. The man set the car in park and said he needed to collect files. Ross raised his voice. A second deputy, Clark, stepped from the security door and walked toward them. Ross pointed at the car and called it suspicious. Clark asked the man for identification. The man handed over his state ID. Clark read the name and checked the date. Everything looked current. Ross stared at the ID and accused the driver of blocking an investigation. Clark tried to lower the tension. Ross stayed aggressive. The man moved to exit the car. Ross stepped closer and ordered him to shut the door. The bodycam on Ross's vest recorded every moment. His voice echoed across the empty lot. The driver placed both hands on the steering wheel and waited. Ross shouted again and said anyone who ignored his authority faced consequences. Clark reminded Ross to slow down. Ross ignored him. The driver reached for his phone and pressed record. Ross told him to stop filming. The driver refused. Ross ordered him out of the car. Clark touched Ross's arm and whispered that the reaction looked out of scale. Ross jerked his arm away and took control of the door handle. The driver unlocked the door and stepped out with both hands visible. Ross told him to face the car. The man complied. Clark asked for the reason for detention. Ross said suspicion of trespass, obstruction, and failure to comply. Clark shook his head and moved to the rear of the sedan to run the plates. Ross stayed close to the driver with a tense posture. As Clark stood near the rear bumper, he looked through the back window. On the seat sat a briefcase with a county seal. Clark radioed dispatch to confirm the plates. Dispatch sent return data. No stolen record, no warrants registered to the county fleet office. Clark returned to the front of the car and told Ross. Ross ignored him again and said the man refused to leave. The man stated that he needed to retrieve files from the courthouse for the next morning. Ross accused him of lying and pushed him against the car. Clark stepped between them and ordered Ross to stop. The driver asked for a supervisor. Ross told him it would not help. Ross leaned close to the man's ear and said, "You'll be sorry." The words entered the bodycam audio with clear tone. Clark heard it. The driver heard it. Traffic on the nearby street rolled past without stopping. The lot stayed silent. At 6:45 p.m., a white SUV entered the lot. A sergeant stepped out and approached the group. Clark explained the situation. The driver stood with hands still visible and calm. Ross paced behind the car with anger in his eyes. The sergeant asked the man for identification. The man handed it over. The sergeant read the card. His posture changed. He handed it back and asked Ross to step aside. The driver was the elected district attorney. Every case in the county passed across his desk. Every officer's testimony entered his office. Ross threatened the one person with legal authority over charging decisions in every courtroom. The sergeant looked at Clark and asked if the body cams were active. Clark said they were. Ross tried to explain his actions. The sergeant stopped him and ordered him to wait by his cruiser. Ross looked shocked, but he complied. The sergeant apologized to the district attorney and asked if he needed additional support. The district attorney said he only needed to retrieve his files from the office. The sergeant walked him inside and told Clark to escort him back to his vehicle afterward. Ross sat alone in his cruiser. He stared at the windshield without speaking. His radio remained silent. Cars drove past the courthouse. Rain tapped on the roof of the cruiser. No one spoke to him. Inside the building, the sergeant and the district attorney walked down a dark hallway to the office suite. The district attorney retrieved a folder and a thumb drive. They returned to the lot. Clark handed back the badge wallet and thanked him for his patience. The district attorney did not express anger. He stated that the complaint would move through official channels. He entered his car and left without speeding or swerving. The lot cleared. The sergeant called the watch commander. He explained everything. The watch commander told him to secure all body cam footage and prepare written statements. Ross heard the radio traffic and lowered his head. Clark approached Ross and asked for his camera. Ross removed it and handed it over. Clark placed it in a secure evidence locker inside the station. The sergeant ordered Ross off duty for the night and told him to report to Internal Affairs at 8 a.m. Ross drove home without speaking. His mind replayed the moment he said the threat. He knew the microphone recorded it. He imagined the review board hearing it. He tried to sleep. He failed. The next morning, Ross entered Internal Affairs. The lieutenant asked for his account. Ross said the driver did not comply. The lieutenant asked why he ignored the driver's ID. Ross said he suspected fraud. The lieutenant asked why he threatened the driver. Ross hesitated. He said he wanted compliance. The lieutenant wrote the statement word for word. Ross left the room and sat in the lobby. His sergeant entered next. Clark followed. The district attorney did not attend. His written complaint arrived through email. 2 days later, the entire command staff met. They reviewed the footage. They listened to every word. They saw the shove. They heard the threat. They watched Ross ignore Clark and the sergeant. They compared his actions to policy. The footage left no doubt. That night, Ross received a call. He returned to the station and entered a conference room. The chief, the captain, and an HR representative sat at a table. The chief told him that the department placed him on administrative leave. They said the investigation continued. They collected his badge and service weapon. Ross signed the suspension paperwork and left the building without speaking. Word spread through the station by sunrise. Officers whispered in hallways. Supervisors stayed quiet. Clark kept his focus on patrol. The sergeant completed reports and sent them to the city attorney. The district attorney's file reached the city manager. Emails circulated through City Hall. The council requested updates. The mayor asked for a briefing. The police chief responded with official language. The body cam recording reached the district attorney's office. His staff watched the footage. Audio played without distortion. The threat sounded clear and strong. The district attorney scheduled a meeting with the chief and the city attorney. Ross stayed home watching his phone. Hours passed. No updates. His mind replayed the moment again and again. A short sentence, spoken in anger, now stood against him. The outcome would not wait long. The department prepared for the next step. When night patrol began, Clark drove past the courthouse. Rainwater pooled near the curb. The parking lot stood empty. The silver sedan did not return. The plaza lights glowed across the wet pavement. Clark pulled back onto the street and continued patrol in silence. The threat hung in the air, recorded by body cam, logged, reviewed, and documented. The city moved toward a hearing. The district attorney waited for the process to complete. The stage shifted. The evidence spoke for itself. The next morning started with heavy rain. Water poured across Main Street and ran into storm drains. Wind bent tree branches along the courthouse walkway. Patrol units lined up outside the station for a shift briefing. Officers hurried across the lot with hoods up and jackets tight against the storm. Inside the station, the briefing room felt tense. Conversations dropped when the captain entered. He told the room to watch conduct and to follow policy with precision. No one mentioned Ross by name, but every officer understood the message. Bodycams stayed on. Commands needed clear tone. No personal threats. No dramatic speeches. The storm outside matched the quiet pressure in the room. Clark left the room and walked to the garage. He checked his cruiser and signed out keys. The sergeant joined him at the exit and asked if he slept much. Clark shook his head. The sergeant said the case would move fast. Internal Affairs gathered statements. The city attorney gathered documents for the district attorney. The chief prepared a press release in case the story leaked. Clark started his shift with routine calls. A minor fender bender downtown. A shoplifting report from a pharmacy. A trespass complaint outside a hardware store. He handled each call with steady steps and clear language. No raised tone. No rapid commands. Drivers followed directions without argument. Store managers signed paperwork. Witnesses left after giving statements. 2 hours into the shift, dispatch reported a disorderly motorist at a gas station. Clark arrived and found a man shouting at employees. The man slammed his hand on the counter and demanded refunds. Clark walked in with bodycam recording. The man turned toward him with clenched fists. Clark told him to step outside for conversation. The man argued, but Clark spoke in calm, short commands. The man backed out and sat on the curb. Clark resolved the dispute with a trespass notice and sent the man home in a cab. The station called Clark back for a meeting at noon. He parked behind the building and stepped inside. The chief waited in a conference room with the captain and the city attorney. They needed his testimony in writing. Clark wrote his statement with clear details. He included every action Ross took at the stop. He wrote the exact words and timeline. He signed the report and handed it over. The captain said a hearing date approached. A disciplinary panel would review the evidence. The panel included a deputy chief, a city attorney, and a civilian representative. They would watch the footage and question every witness. Ross needed legal representation. The district attorney waited for the outcome before making any decisions on charges. Across town, Ross sat at his dining table with a laptop open. He watched the bodycam footage over and over. His voice filled the speakers. His posture looked aggressive. His shove looked forceful. His threat landed with full sound. He paused the video and lowered his head. The digital clock on the microwave ticked through seconds. Ross thought about his record. Years of patrol. A promotion cycle scheduled for winter. All of it placed at risk by one decision in a parking lot. He called his union representative. The representative explained the process. The panel held power to suspend or terminate. The state licensing board could review certification after termination. The district attorney could file charges or request review by the state bureau. Ross rubbed his forehead and tried to steady his breath. Back at the courthouse, employees whispered in hallways. They heard rumors. Some exaggerated the story. Others defended the department. Most waited for facts. The district attorney worked from his office with the blinds closed. His staff loaded footage onto a server. Investigators reviewed every frame from every camera unseen. No part of the video helped Ross. At 3 p.m., the district attorney stepped outside for air. Rain slowed. The sky shifted from gray to pale blue. He walked across the plaza to the fountain. Water splashed against stone. A group of students toured the plaza on a field trip. He nodded at them and returned to his office. Later that afternoon, the chief requested a meeting with him. They sat in a small conference room at City Hall. The chief apologized for the incident. The district attorney listened without emotion. He stated that the legal process worked best without public anger. He wanted accuracy, not revenge. The chief agreed. Night patrol started with clear skies. Clark passed the courthouse during rounds. He slowed near the employee lot. The space where the silver sedan parked now sat empty. Clark continued driving and turned onto River Street. A man waved from the sidewalk. His bike chain broke. Clark helped him secure the bike in the trunk of the cruiser and gave him a ride home. Small calls filled the night. Quiet tasks replaced conflict. Around midnight, Clark parked near the south end of the riverfront. He filled out reports on his laptop. Radio chatter faded into quiet intervals. A pickup coasted past with 2 teens in the bed. Clark pulled them over and issued a warning. The teens left without complaint. Ross sat at home watching his badge on the countertop. He pressed his palms against his eyes. Every officer had tense stops. Every officer faced defiant drivers. But threats against a county official crossed a line impossible to defend. The badge stayed on the counter. His future stayed uncertain. By sunrise, City Hall released a short statement. A deputy faced disciplinary review after recorded confrontation with a county official. They did not release names. They did not share the video. Reporters called the station. The public information officer told them no further details until the hearing. Rumors grew online. Someone posted that an officer threatened a judge. Someone else claimed a senator got stopped. Someone posted that the district attorney fired half the department. None of it accurate. Truth stayed locked inside the evidence locker. 3 days passed. The hearing arrived. The panel sat in a windowless conference room inside the station. The deputy chief sat in the center. The city attorney sat to his right. A retired school administrator sat to his left as the civilian representative. Ross entered with his union representative and sat at a small table. The panel played the footage. They watched every second without interruption. Ross kept his eyes down. When the threat reached the audio feed, the room stayed silent. The video ended. The deputy chief asked Ross if he wanted to speak. Ross said he lost control of his tone and judgment. The deputy chief asked why he ignored identification. Ross said he doubted authenticity. The deputy chief asked why he ignored Clark and the sergeant. Ross had no answer. After questions ended, the panel left the room. Ross sat alone with his representative. Outside the door, officers passed in the hallway without looking inside. After 30 minutes, the panel returned. The deputy chief read the outcome. Termination. Ross leaned back in his chair. His representative placed a hand on his shoulder. The deputy chief thanked Ross for service and instructed him to return all department property. Ross nodded and left. The news reached the department within minutes. Officers stood silent at roll call. The chief reminded everyone that policy and respect stood above ego. No badge placed anyone above the law. Every officer understood the message. Later that day, the district attorney issued a written statement. It contained one sentence. The law protects the public, and the public expects fairness. No insults. No anger, no dramatic language. Clark returned to routine patrol. He drove past the courthouse that night. Lights glowed across the plaza. Law stayed intact. The threat no longer hung over the department. Accountability arrived by process, not force. The city moved forward. The week after the termination moved fast. Patrol shifts changed. New assignments filled the board. Officers returned to routine work, though tension lingered in quiet corners of the station. Some supported the decision. Others felt uncomfortable with how fast the case unfolded. No one spoke loudly about it. Work continued. Clark started his next shift with Sergeant Hale riding along for evaluation. Hale watched his approach on every call. He checked each report, each traffic stop, each radio transmission. Clark stayed calm and direct. No raised tone, no sharp language. He explained each command, kept distance when needed, and controlled scenes with steady posture. At 10 a.m., dispatch sent Clark and Hale to a welfare check at a small home on Rosewood Lane. A neighbor called about a man who had not left his house in days. Clark knocked on the door and waited. The curtains never moved. He knocked again and called out. A faint voice answered from inside. The man had fallen in the bathroom and injured his knee. Clark radioed for EMS, unlocked the front door, and guided medics inside. The man thanked Clark as medics lifted him onto a stretcher. Hale watched and wrote notes in a small binder. After clearing the scene, Clark and Hale returned to the cruiser. Hale spoke for the first time in an hour. He said professionalism separated strong officers from reckless ones. Clark nodded. Hale told him the department watched patrol conduct closely since the courthouse incident. The camera recorded everything. Every scene demanded control, not ego. By noon, rain clouds cleared. The sky turned clear and sharp. Clark parked near the Civic Center and finished paperwork. Pedestrians walked the sidewalks. Vendors set up food carts for a weekend event. The city felt calm again. At 1:20 p.m., dispatch reported a verbal dispute at a grocery store. Clark and Hale arrived to find two customers arguing near the entrance. Clark stepped between them and separated both. One man accused the other of cutting a line. The other said he did nothing wrong. Clark took statements, reviewed security footage with the manager, and issued a simple trespass order to the aggressive customer. The man left without resistance. Hale watched Clark finish the report and nodded. Later that afternoon, Clark stopped at the station to upload footage. Officers gathered in the hallway near the coffee machine. A conversation started over weekend events. Someone mentioned that the district attorney planned a public meeting with city leaders. No one knew the details. Rumors started again, small and quiet. Clark returned to the cruiser. Hale said nothing during the drive. At 4:40 p.m., dispatch sent them to a vehicle blocking a fire lane at a strip mall. Clark knocked on the window. The driver apologized and moved the car. No hostility, no tension. Hale wrote one more note in his binder. At shift end, Hale met with the captain. Clark waited outside the office. 10 minutes later, Hale stepped out and shook his hand. He said the department approved Clark's patrol status without restrictions. Clark thanked him and left the building. Night patrol took over. The station lights glowed across the lot. Officers walked in and out with quiet steps. Clark drove home, changed clothes, and sat at his kitchen table. He poured iced tea and stared at his laptop. News outlets posted short statements about the termination. Comment sections filled with arguments. Some defended Ross, others praised the district. Clark closed the laptop and turned off the kitchen light. The next morning, Clark attended a community meeting at a church near the downtown district. The chief spoke about safety programs and traffic enforcement changes. Residents asked about patrol coverage and late-night disturbances. No one mentioned the courthouse incident. Clark stood at the back of the room near a table with brochures. When the meeting ended, he stepped outside and walked to his cruiser. A reporter waited near the curb. She approached Clark and held out a microphone. Clark asked her to speak with the public information officer. She pressed for comment. Clark repeated the instruction and entered the cruiser. The reporter sighed and left. 2 days later, the district attorney invited the chief to a meeting at City Hall. Clark did not attend. He only heard short pieces from supervisors. The district attorney wanted regular meetings between police leaders and prosecutors. He wanted fast evidence transfer, fast communication, and no breakdowns between agencies. The chief agreed. 3 weeks passed. Winter neared. Temperatures dropped. Clark patrolled busy streets during holiday events. Crowds gathered downtown for parades and music. Officers kept watch along the sidewalks. Clark directed traffic near the Civic Center and handled minor disturbances without issue. On a Thursday afternoon, Clark responded to a theft call at a department store. A man stole electronics and ran outside. Clark chased him across the parking lot, tackled him near a hedge, and cuffed him. Backup arrived and secured stolen items. Clark transported the man to jail. The booking process took 1 hour. When he stepped into the station lobby afterward, he saw the district attorney entering through a side hallway. The district attorney nodded at Clark. Clark nodded back. No tension, no anger. No mention of past events. The district attorney followed a deputy through the door toward interview rooms. Clark walked outside, stepped into his cruiser, and returned to patrol. News stories about Ross faded. A few blogs kept posting about police conduct, but the city moved on. Officers focused on daily work. Clark drove through neighborhoods with holiday lights shining across lawns. Children waved at patrol cars. Residents shoveled sidewalks. Life looked normal again. 1 month later, Clark received an award for service during the courthouse incident. The chief invited him to a small ceremony inside the station. The captain, a few supervisors, and city council members attended. The chief thanked Clark for calm actions. The council president shook his hand. Clark accepted a certificate and stepped back into line. No speeches. No applause. Simple recognition. That night, Clark placed the framed certificate on his shelf at home. He sat on the couch and listened to footsteps from the apartment above him. He looked at the certificate, then at the wall where his uniform hung. He felt no pride or excitement. He felt steady. He finished dinner, turned off the lights, and slept. The district attorney continued his regular duties. Court cases moved on schedule. Police escorted inmates from the jail to the courthouse. Public defenders requested evidence. Prosecutors reviewed case files. Judges ruled on motions. No one referenced the parking lot confrontation. Workers passed each other in hallways and elevators without discussion. But one final step remained. The State Law Enforcement Board reviewed Ross's certification. They requested the footage. They reviewed it and listened to testimony. 2 months after termination, they issued their conclusion: revocation. Without certification, Ross had no authority to work as a law enforcement officer anywhere in the state. The board sent the decision to the department. The chief read it, signed the form, and filed the notice. Some officers felt sympathy. Some said nothing. Clark read the decision quietly and closed the file. A week later, Clark passed the courthouse during patrol. Snow covered the plaza. The fountain stood frozen. The employee lot held no silver sedan. The building lights shined through frosted windows. Clark watched for a moment, then drove onward. Across the city, people prepared for holidays. Light displays glowed across rooftops. Businesses decorated storefronts. Families gathered in restaurants. Patrol units watched streets with steady presence. No heated arguments. No tense confrontations. The threat spoke into a microphone had turned into paperwork, hearings, evidence, rulings, and consequences. No shortcuts. No pressure. The system handled the event without noise. Clark continued his route through District 2. The radio stayed calm. The night passed smooth. Snow fell in quiet flakes. Streetlights brightened every patch of white. By midnight, Clark pulled into the station lot and ended his shift. He locked the cruiser, signed out, and walked to his personal truck. He drove home through empty streets. Houses slept under snowy rooftops. Inside his apartment, Clark hung his uniform in the closet, set his badge on the dresser, and lay down to rest. His breathing slowed. His thoughts cleared. His body relaxed. He served the city without force or anger. His actions held firm against pressure. The badge on his dresser reflected a promise to enforce law, not ego. The courthouse lights stayed bright. The office of the district attorney stayed active. The department learned from one night of conflict. The law stood steady. Winter ended. Snow melted from sidewalks and gutters. Spring rain washed dust from parked cars along Main Street. Patrol schedules rotated. New officers joined the department. Training sessions filled classrooms in the station. Clark took on a mentor role without ceremony. Supervisors watched his steady posture during calls and used his reports as examples of clean writing. One morning, the chief called Clark to his office. Clark entered and stood at attention. The chief said the district attorney requested a meeting. Clark asked for the time and location. The chief gave the details and dismissed him. No lecture, no warning, only direct instruction. The meeting took place in a conference room at City Hall. Clark arrived early and waited in a chair near a window. The district attorney entered, closed the door, and sat across from him. A recorder on the table captured the conversation. A staff member from the city manager's office witnessed the meeting. The district attorney thanked Clark for steady conduct during the confrontation in the parking lot. He said officers with control protected the public and the department. He explained that the city planned a training program on de-escalation and professional language during tense stops. Clark would assist as a field example. His footage would serve as an instructional tool. Clark agreed without hesitation. The district attorney thanked him again and ended the meeting. Clark left to City Hall and returned to his cruiser. The air smelled like wet asphalt after rain. The plaza held a few workers sweeping sidewalks. The city looked peaceful. Later that week, Clark sat in a training room with new recruits. The captain opened a presentation with short comments about policy and accountability. Then the footage from the courthouse incident appeared on the screen. Recruits watched Ross ignore commands, grab the door, and issue the threat. The captain paused the video and pointed to Clark's position in the frame. He highlighted calm posture, safe distance, and direct language. The recruits took notes. Clark stood at the front of the room and answered questions about procedure. He did not exaggerate the story. He did not insult Ross. He described the steps he took and why. The recruits thanked him. The captain closed the session. That afternoon, Clark returned to patrol. A call came in for a disturbance near a bus stop. A man shouted at passers-by and swung a backpack at a trash can. Clark and another officer approached. The man dropped the backpack and raised his hands. Clark told him to sit on the bench. The man complied. A quick check showed no weapons. Clark talked with him for a few minutes and learned he needed shelter. Clark transported him to a center that offered food and beds. The man thanked him before entering the building. The evening passed without major calls. Clark drove through. Neighborhoods checked parks and watched school crossings. Across the city, families ate dinner and walked dogs. Business owners locked up for the night. Traffic rolled across the river bridge as lights reflected on the surface. Inside the station, the chief met with council members. They wanted stronger ties between law enforcement and local offices. The district attorney supported the idea. The chief agreed and planned quarterly meetings between prosecutors and police supervisors. Clark's name surfaced as a patrol representative. The chief approved. Months passed. Summer arrived. Temperatures climbed. Patrol cars waited under covered parking so seats stayed cool. Clark handled traffic enforcement near school zones for summer programs. He issued warnings to drivers who sped near crosswalks. Most slowed down without argument. One evening, a call came from the courthouse. A clerk saw a man taking photos of license plates in the employee lot. Clark arrived with another officer and questioned the man. He said he worked for a law firm and needed license plate records for an investigation. He had no paperwork, so Clark told him to leave the property. The man obeyed. Clark documented the encounter and cleared the scene. As Clark walked back to his cruiser, he looked across the lot. The memory of the confrontation flashed across his thoughts, not with anger, but with clarity. The law held, the badge did its work, and the system corrected a mistake. No argument changed that. Across the city, the district attorney worked with community groups to support youth programs. Police officers volunteered at events. Clark attended a basketball game at a community gym. Kids asked him to take pictures with them. Parents brought food and drinks. The district attorney made a short statement about respect between public servants and residents. The gym filled with applause. Clark stood near the bleachers and watched without seeking attention. Later that summer, the state held a conference on law enforcement standards. The chief and the captain attended. They presented the courthouse incident as a case study on accountability. They showed edited footage of the stop and explained how quick review and honest testimony protected public trust. Other departments asked questions about policy. The chief answered with ease. The next month, the city settled a civil claim filed by Ross. The payout remained small. The settlement avoided a long court process. Ross moved to another town and took a private security job. No officer spoke his name at the station. His locker stayed empty until a new recruit received it. On a warm night in August, Clark patrolled near the riverfront park. Families grilled food and children played on swings. Music played from portable speakers. Fireflies flickered across the grass. The city felt safe and calm. Clark parked near the boardwalk and walked on foot patrol. People greeted him with nods. Some thanked him. He offered short replies and continued walking. No grand speeches, no dramatic gestures. Steady presence worked better than attention. Near the end of his shift, the district attorney passed the boardwalk during an evening jog. He slowed and stopped near Clark. They exchanged a few short words. The district attorney thanked him again for steady conduct. Clark nodded. The district attorney continued jogging. At midnight, Clark returned to the station. He filed reports and logged evidence. Officers clocked out and walked to their cars. Supervisors checked maps for overnight coverage. The chief passed through the hallway carrying folders. He nodded at Clark, but said nothing. The badge on Clark's chest reflected the light from the ceiling. In the fall, Clark received an invitation to a regional training seminar. The course focused on officer conduct during tense stops. The chief sent him as a department representative. Clark attended, listened to instructors, and took notes. He returned and shared details with the training unit. At the next staff meeting, the captain announced a new policy update. Officers needed to notify supervisors when interacting with elected officials. Documentation became mandatory. No special treatment existed. The law applied the same to every driver. The district attorney supported the change. The courthouse plaza filled with leaves in October. Workers swept sidewalks and cleaned fountains. Clark drove past during patrol. The silver sedan appeared again in the employee lot. The district attorney stepped out carrying a briefcase and a jacket. Clark slowed the cruiser and nodded. The district attorney acknowledged him with a quick nod of his own. No tension, no memory of threats. Only two public servants crossing paths during routine work. Winter returned. Snow covered the streets again. Patrol units rolled across quiet neighborhoods. Clark placed chains on his tires when roads iced. He responded to stalled cars and fender benders. Residents waved as he passed. Children built snowmen in front yards. One night in January, the station held a small ceremony. Officers received service ribbons for various calls. Clark earned recognition for mentorship and training. He stood at the front of the room and accepted a small ribbon. He shook hands with the chief and returned to the lineup without applause or cheers. Silent respect filled the room. After the ceremony, Clark returned to patrol. Snowflakes drifted down in slow lines. Streetlights glowed across the white streets. A call came from a downtown bar. A man refused to leave after last call. Clark arrived and spoke with the bartender. He asked the man to step outside. The man argued but followed Clark to the sidewalk. A talk of alternative transportation ended the conflict. The man called a friend to pick him up. As Clark stepped back into his cruiser, he thought about the quiet weight of the badge. No loud speeches, no threats, no bragging, only steady action. Respect arrived through restraint. At the end of his shift, Clark drove through the courthouse plaza once more before heading home. The fountain stood covered in ice. The steps reflected moonlight. The employee lot sat empty. Clark turned onto Main Street and continued toward the station. Inside the building, he signed off duty and placed his bodycam in the charging dock. He hung his keys and closed his locker. The officer finishing paperwork at the desk looked up and said goodnight. Clark nodded and walked out the door. The station lights glowed behind him. Snow fell in small flakes across the parking lot. Clark stepped into his truck and started the engine. He drove toward home on quiet streets. The city slept under winter clouds. The threat spoken in anger no longer held weight. The law responded. The process worked. Accountability stood firm. Clark closed his eyes for a moment after parking in his driveway. He walked inside, set his badge on the dresser, and rested. Thanks for watching. The next episode drops soon with another incident where a simple stop exposed the truth behind the badge. A free guide to public record requests waits in the description. Stay aware.